Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammi and Nathan Jaeger.
Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. On today's show, the tables have been turned and Nathan and I are being interviewed by Josh Taylor from Unleashed. We talk a little bit about what is the Fuel Collective, why we started the business, how on earth better relationships equal a better world, and what the two of us do to keep our relationship fueled up.
Welcome to the Date Forever podcast, everyone. Today we've turned the tables and we've actually invited Josh Taylor from Unleash the podcast to come on the show and interview us about our relationship and about Fuel Collective and how that all came about. So over to you, Josh.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. I feel super honored to be interviewing the co-hosts and co-founders of Fuel Collective and the Date Forever podcast. It's awesome to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for interviewing us.
So guess a little bit of a background for everybody listening. This is a chance for all of us and all of you to really get to know the people behind the Date Forever podcast and Fuel Collective and hear a little bit around the humans that are actually there behind the scenes and the voices that you hear. So Sammi's an integrator and loves helping visionaries to bring their ideas to life. She especially loves it when those ideas help make the world a better place. Nathan is an electrical engineer with a passion for technology. Together as Team Jaeger, they are co-founders of Fuel Collective and the co-hosts of the Date Forever podcast. They are on a mission to fuel up people's relationships while making an impact in the world as a business for good. Sammi and Nathan, thank you for, taking the time to flip the switch and give people a chance to know you guys and learn more around, what you do and the mission that you're on. I think it's awesome.
Thanks, Josh.
That's our pleasure.
So let's start from the beginning. How was Fuel Collective born? What is Fuel Collective?
So Fuel Collective probably started, the idea for it probably started about 3 or 4 years ago. So it was around the time that we were renewing our vows for our 5th wedding anniversary. And what we were kind of noticing was that there was quite a few people around us that had been in long-term relationships where something just wasn't quite right and their relationships were falling apart. They were going through really tough times and in a few cases, their marriages actually broke down and ended in divorce. And it just kind of got us thinking, if people haven't had real strong relationships to model their own relationships off of, or hadn't learned great relationship lessons through life, where do you actually learn that? And so this idea is kind of built over the last 3 or 4 years, and we want to have a space where we can share lessons that we've learned in our own relationship, as well as from some experts along the way, and bring a community together of like-minded people that really want to fuel up their relationships, want to have some deep chats and want to learn from each other and learn from some experts to really fuel up their relationships.
Yeah, to add on to what Nate's just shared, we kind of realized that, if you want to go and get better at tennis, you join a tennis club and you surround yourself with other people who are also trying to get better at tennis, and you can apply that to anything in life, really. It's like if you want to go and get better at business, you go and join a business community. If you want to go get better at, sewing or quilting, you join a sewing or quilting or crafting community. And we sort of started to put the feelers out there and we just couldn't find anything that was a community or a group or a collective of people who were all on a journey to have a better relationship year on year on year. And yet there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of relationships going on in households all across Australia and the world.
And I think that's such an important thing and so exciting is that you talk around, it's a collective. It's people coming together and learning from that. I guess, how does that translate in a practical sense or in a real sense? What, Fuel Collective, what does that actually mean and do for these people that are becoming part of the community or are wanting to involve themselves in that world?
Yeah, I'm an innately pretty lazy person. And what I mean by that is I like the path of least resistance. If I'm trying to figure something out, I am on YouTube finding the tutorial for the person who's already figured it out. I really love reading books that help me take the shortcuts to learning and growing. And what we are really trying to build is a community of people who are open to sharing their stories and sharing the lessons that they've navigated in their own relationship. The problems that we come up against in our relationships with, conflict and navigating different careers and meeting in the middle and, values clashes, all those kind of things, someone else has likely solved it before. So we want to build a community of people who are talking about those things, talking about those problems. How did they overcome it and what works for them?
Yeah. And that, I guess, has been one of the challenges in observing other people. Like from the outside, you might see a couple that you think has a really great, thriving relationship and there's something great going on there. But how do you actually go and ask them, what is it about your relationship that's great? Like it's a little bit, can be a little bit daunting, I guess. And especially if it's your parents or something like that, you might just be observing it for 20 odd years while you're growing up, but not actually understand what's going on behind the doors that's actually keeping their relationship great and keeping their relationship alive. So it's really about bringing a collective of people together to share those lessons, learn some lessons together, and really elevate their relationships.
And as you mentioned before, Nathan, some people don't have or don't grow up with a vision of what a great relationship looks like, or what they perceive to be a great relationship is very different to somebody else. And suddenly, these two people have clashes in the way that they believe their relationship should run.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of the big problem that we saw is that, people are not being exposed to healthy, happy, thriving relationships. And then they're going off and falling in love and finding another person. And then they're going about trying to create this thing that they've never been up close to before. They may have parents who are still together, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that relationship was thriving or has the characteristics of a relationship that they want to build themselves. So how do you do that? How do you gain those foundational skills of relationships? So that's what we're trying to do.
And how do you do that? How do you deliver these foundational and fundamental skills for these couples?
So we built Fuel Collective off of the methodology of what we're calling a fueled up life. And a fueled up life revolves around the idea that we have 8 different fuel tanks, and any one of those different fuel tanks could be running low for a period of time. But if you neglect it for too long, there's going to be consequences. So it's kind of got this dashboard of tanks, and they're all at different levels of, empty to full at any one given moment in time.
So for some context, I'll just run you through the 8 tanks. So the first one is self. The second one is romantic relationships. The third one is relationships and network. Fourth one is humming household. The fifth one's all about career and business. Sixth one is wealth and lifestyle. The seventh one is about the world. And the 8th one is the future.
So what we've found is that when people can sort of compartmentalize their life as if it's made up of these different 8 tanks, you can get a much quicker look at what's working and what's not, and what areas of your life you need to add a little bit more fuel, and then what's actually going really well. Because sometimes you might feel like I need a self-care day, and you go off and you indulge and you spoil yourself, and you come back from it and you don't actually feel any, more replenished. But if you'd gone and looked at your dashboard and realized that that tank was actually quite full and it was your wider relationship and network that was feeling low, you would have maybe come away from that feeling refueled if you'd done those activities with a friend. So you could neglect any one of those things for a period of time, say your sense of self, taking time for your own self-care or your own self-development or your own growth. You could neglect that for a little while without the consequences being too disastrous. But if you let it go completely, then all of a sudden you don't know who you are anymore. You might have an incredibly romantic, fueled up relationship, but you don't have a relationship with yourself. And that's problematic. And the same for your career or your business. That might not be a focus area for a little while, and you might let that tank run low and it's just meets a base level, I guess, of fulfillment, and it allows you to do other things. But eventually that might become a problem.
I absolutely love that, because the term relationship has so many different levels or, different meanings to it. You've got your significant partner, you've got family, you've got friends, your relationship with yourself. And you really do encompass all of that in one place and one collective, as if it was.
So those 8 different tanks, someone might feel like they have others but those are the 8 that we've identified that everybody seems to have. We all have a place in the world. We all have a future that we're either planning for or not. We're all hopefully not living life as an island, and we do have relationships with, our friends and our family and our peers and our, in-laws and, in some cases children or nieces or nephews. And those relationships matter.
So how did you navigate this and learn this yourselves to be able to, I guess, deliver some of these things? What were the challenges that you faced as a couple that helped you develop Fuel Collective and understand what was needed from other people out there?
So I think it's been just lessons that we've learned and pieced together ourselves over the past 13 years. So as an example, I guess Humming Household is probably a good example where there were certain chores and things that were happening just in our day-to-day running of our lives that
were friction points.
Yeah, real friction points. And we got to a point where we're like, no, something's got to change. We've got to do something about this. So it was things like finding a way to manage our money better. So automating all of our bill payments. And so I guess that became a real focus point for a while because that tank had been running low. So we've learnt the lessons, I guess, in different areas at different times during our relationships. And I guess the methodology we've come up with is around trying to check in with those tanks and work out at a point in time which tanks are running high and which ones are you're really succeeding at, and then which ones are running low, which are the friction points, which are the ones that actually need some work at that point in time, and trying to identify what it is that you can actually then put in place to resolve some of that conflict and to jump some of those hurdles.
Yeah, and actively refuel that tank. What could you do if you're having difficulties with that Humming Household piece and it's taking a lot of time and money and energy for that household to run? Like, what are some things that you could do to make that easier, and alleviate some of that mental load and, demand on your time just to have your household running?
I love that because that's where it really comes into, we're starting to see Fuel Collective come to life in that it's fueling different areas of your life up, and I guess using the collective of the people around you to make that happen, and using those resources and those different things that are there available.
But that's a great example, even in that Humming Household, like the way that various couples do things like food shop and meal plan and meal prep and then eat. Like, that's totally different. And it took us a long time to figure out what system worked well for us. And it was quite a peculiar thing to ask another couple, be like, hey, so how do you guys feed each other? Like, tell us, like, I don't recall ever being in an environment where that would be like a normal kind of thing to ask, like, or like, how much money do you guys spend on groceries every week? Like, that's a bit of a, I don't know, kind of question. And then Nathan and I in our own relationship have tried all different variations of like, okay, well, Sunday is food prep day and then we'll go do the food shopping and then the meal prep and then we'll, batch everything and then we don't have to cook or think about it for the rest of the week. And that worked for us for a little while, but having the transparency to ask other people or see what other couples were doing behind the scenes might have helped us solve that problem sooner.
And I guess there are a lot of challenges too when you do merge two lives together. Especially if people have been living by themselves for a while or have been living in different environment like a share house or something like that. When you do bring these two lives together, you are going to definitely have conflicting views on how things should be done. And so it's about learning some of those lessons up front or just having the conversations really about how do we want to run our household? What is the vision for our wealth and our lifestyle and how do we want to do these things?
Yeah, and what are we working towards?
Yeah.
So when you're talking around people that I guess are part of Fuel Collective and are having these relationships, at what point should these people be looking for these resources or looking for these tools or even asking these kind of questions of how should we navigate this relationship? At what point should a couple be asking those questions?
That's a really good question. And I don't think there's like a, after date 7, you should have this conversation kind of manual. And
no sex till date 5 kind of, rules.
Yeah, I don't know. Nathan and I didn't really date. So our whole relationship started as a relationship. We were already in love before I was his girlfriend.
And we were housemates. So a lot of those challenges had already been navigated around.
So we're probably not the best people to ask around like timing and like what's, normal. But I think once you've identified that you've got long-term intent for that relationship, that's when you should start to have those conversations, because you can't assume, what you think your life is going to look like might be a totally different vision than what, your partner is thinking their life is going to look like. And unless you actually put it on the table and have those chats, like, how do you imagine this working? What do you think about this or that? Or how often do you want to see your in-laws? How often do you imagine that we're going on dates? How often do you take solo trips or trips with your girls' weekend or guys' weekend or whatever it might be? Or, whose career is going to take the lead, and for what period of time? And, how long do you want to work for? When do you imagine that you're going to retire? Do you want to retire? How much money do you think we should have by the time? Like, all of those really big questions, and they all kind of sit across these different tanks.
But I think on the flip side of that too, it's never too late to start having these conversations too. So we've had some feedback from people listening to the Date Forever podcast, and they've been in relationships for 5, 10, 15 years. And they're saying that the topics that we've been discussing in the podcast have really triggered some great conversations for them to actually start rethinking some things or to bring some extra fuel to certain tanks of their relationship. So I don't think there's ever a endpoint to your learning, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think your relationship's always in a state of care, right? It's kind of like the same as putting fuel in your car. It's not a task is done and then you never have to do it again. It's always at a state of flux. I think, your relationship and the conversations that you have, things change all the time. So it's never done.
And particularly with the year we've had, 2020, obviously so many people have had to navigate so many different changes. One partner may have lost their job or both may have. And you mentioned in the tagline of the podcast, learn to date yourself and your significant other forever. If you do go through that and you've lost your job and you're the sole income earner, you've now got to not only fuel your tank, but fuel that for the entire family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something like that is a perfect example where it touches on multiple tanks as well. It's touching on your career and business tank. It's touching on your wealth and lifestyle. It's touching on your humming household.
Touching on the future.
Yeah, it's touching on your future. It's touching on your romantic relationship because you might now be spending a lot of time together. It's touching on your relationship and network, like with COVID and not being able to see family. So there's constantly things like that really means that you need to reassess some of those things and just take a step back and go, actually, how are we going in these different areas of our life and which ones need to take priority at the moment?
So you talk about the idea of learning to date yourself and your significant other forever. What does that look like in a practical sense? How do you date yourself? What does that look like for, from a Fuel Collective point of view?
So, well, I guess I'm going to talk about it from my perspective. So what I do for me to date myself. And I think everybody's got their own practices, or they know that they should have their own practices, I guess. I am big on personal development and growth. So I love reading, and I'll clock, at least a good few hours each week reading. And I normally do that as an activity on my own, totally invested in myself. And then there's other things like having hobbies and interests and time with my friends where Nath is not anywhere to be seen. That's my thing that I do on my own. And that is really important to my sense of self and who I am. I don't want to just become this blob of a Sammi and Nath shaped person. I want to be Sammi and my husband, Nathan.
And I think that self piece is super important to be able to go away, do your own hobbies, have your own friendship groups, and then bring something back to the relationship. Whereas I guess if everything is focused around your romantic relationship and doing everything together, quite often things can get stale because you're not bringing something back to the relationship. You're not bringing anything new. Yeah,
or you're no longer a human being.
Yeah.
you only exist in context of that relationship.
Yeah.
And how has that been, I guess, from a personal perspective with COVID, having to, go into that lockdown period, being together 24/7, whether it's working from home, how have you navigated that in being able to be yourself with that person there 24/7 and not even being able to have the freedom to go visit people and do your own thing?
That has been a real challenge for us, I guess, and something which we have definitely had to navigate as opposed to something that's just happened easily. I mean, saying that, we love spending time with each other, so that's amazing. But we've also got to remember that there are other people in the world and not to forget about doing our activities and our hobbies and things like that. So maybe in an evening, I'll just, instead of doing something together, I might just say to Sammi, hey babe, look, I just kind of need some of my own time tonight. I'm just going to duck down to the shed and fix one of my bikes. Or do one of my hobbies that is by myself, even though we're actually at home together.
Yeah, I think that we are often at home together, but not together. So, very early in COVID, we flipped our what was guest room into our full-time office so that we can close the door on it at the end of the night. But then we have, we're lucky enough to have enough space that we can still be separate, even if we're both home at the same time. So, I've had girls' nights on Zoom, and I've had, all of those kind of networking and social activities that are now, being delivered digitally. I haven't really stopped doing any of those things. No. It's just the shape that they are taking.
And it's obviously the same with your relationship, the shape in that, that was operating, and, things you were doing on weekends, you're still doing that, but just in a different way or different format, essentially.
Yeah. So we definitely made sure that our relationship was still a priority during COVID. So one of the practices which we had in place, we've had in place for probably 18 months or maybe 2 years now, is a 2x2x2 date nights. So essentially the methodology is that every 2 weeks you have a date night. Every 2 months you have a night away, and then every 2 years is what it's meant to be. You go on a big holiday, but we normally do 2 holidays a year. So we've kind of adapted it for our own values, which travels high on our values. But it was really that first piece around the date night every 2 weeks that we made sure was still a definite priority during that time. So the way that we manage it is that I organise a date night in the first half of a month, and then Sammi organises a date night in the second half of the month. And so this works really well for us because it just means that I can organise a date night for something that I want to do maybe, or something that I think that Sammi will really like. And it gives me the autonomy to work out the time, work out all the venues, work out all the logistics of it, and Sammi just gets to rock up and have a nice date. And same for her dates as well. So there might be something which she really wants to do, so she can organise that for her date, or something that she really thinks that I might like to do as well. And then I can just rock up and have an amazing date with my wife.
And I think that's really important too, that you found something that works for you, or you found this methodology and adapted it in your own way, which is what Fuel Collective is all about, right? Is here's the tools and the resources, but
make them your own.
Make them your own and make your relationship the way that you want it to be.
Mm. I think that's definitely been something that we've observed in hosting the Date Forever podcast, is we talk to different couples and we talk to different experts, and they give wildly conflicting recommendations or advice, or, what works for one couple is polar opposite to what works for another couple, and even consensus of, key players in the relationship field like Esther Perel and Gottman. Sometimes they say completely different things about what's great for a relationship, whether or not it's around boundaries or setting expectations. Sometimes they say completely different things. So it's hard to navigate, and it really is about, taking the coat off of the, retail floor, trying it on. Does this fit well? Does this, work for me in my situation? Yeah, it does. No, it doesn't. Or yes, it does, but I need to take it to the tailor and amend it a little bit.
And it's that being able to test what works for you, and being at the same time being supported by a network or a group of people within the collective that can help you, navigate whether that is right or wrong, or, comfort you whilst you do that.
Absolutely.
So explain to me a little bit around the idea that better relationships equal a better world. How did that statement come together, and what does that actually mean or look like?
So Harvard did a study that spanned over 75 years, and it's the longest study on human happiness and personal growth that's ever been conducted. And they followed a group of around 700, I think it was 700 men over their lifetime. And what they found was that good relationships keep us healthier and happier. So there was 3 really big findings. It's that number 1 was our social connections are good for us, and loneliness kills people. More connection, you have a longer and healthier and happier life. The second is that the quality of your relationships impacts the quality of your life. So living in conflict is really bad for our health. So high conflict marriages without a lot of affection are bad for our brain and our body and our well-being. Whereas living in a good relationship and a warm relationship is actually quite protective. So there's a huge indicator between how satisfied you are in your relationships at 50 is a big indicator to how healthy and happy you'll be at 80. And then the third finding was that good relationships protect our brains. When we're in a relationship and we feel like we can rely on our partner, it's protective of our brain. And as we get older, it actually protects us from some of the normal things that occur in old age. Whereas if you're in a relationship where you don't feel like you can rely on your chosen partner, that memory starts to fade a lot earlier. So really, in terms of human happiness, the thing that we could invest in terms of, our career or our wealth or acquiring capital and assets and things, the thing that generates the most amount of return on investment for happiness is our relationships.
And in that sense, that creates a better world for yourself. You mentioned earlier that one of the things that you fuel up through Fuel Collective is the better world piece, or that larger piece. How do people then do that through their relationships or what they've been able to learn and grow and develop with?
So the idea is really that if you have a better relationship and the quality of your relationship directly impacts the quality of your life, you then can elevate the level of problems that you're solving. So instead of solving problems at home with your partner, whether or not it's around communication or, distribution of workload or that, just generally getting organized in your life, if you're busy solving those small problems all the time, you can't possibly solve any big ones. Nathan and I are huge advocates for the United Nations global goals, and there's 17 really big problems in the world. And we feel that if everybody was elevating the caliber of problem they were able to solve, we'd have a better world.
I absolutely love that. And that's a huge part of obviously what you guys do. There's so many different moving wheels. There's obviously the Date Forever podcast. There's the Thriving Couples Collective. There's the Fuel Collective. How does all of this fit together in this little world that you've created? What does that look like in a practical sense?
So from a business and a structure point of view, Fuel Collective is the business, and in the future we hope to have a whole suite of products and services that help couples create those thriving relationships and lives. The Date Forever podcast is a way for us to reach a really wide audience for free. We want to be able to provide value and support to people who may not have the financial means or time or any of those kind of things. It's low barrier. There's no barriers to entry to access that information or that education. And then the Thriving Couples Collective is for those people who have put their hand up and said, yeah, I want to get a little bit closer to other couples who are moving through some of these things.
So for people that are listening and really identify with some of the tools that you're talking around and some of this methodology, what's the step for them to learn a little bit more and to be able to create a better relationship for themselves?
So I think if they're listening to this, they're on it. So the Date Forever podcast is definitely the first thing to be checking out. That's where we're going to share a lot of our tips and tricks and inviting experts onto the show to really share what, I guess, some of their expertise, but then also what they're doing in their own relationships. So Date Forever podcast is definitely the first thing to jump into. And then, if they want to get a little bit more intimate and want to be around some more like-minded people, that's when they should jump across into the Thriving Couples Collective and really embrace the community and share some stories of their own relationships and learn from others.
And ask some questions.
Yeah, ask some questions.
Yeah, but we would also recommend that anyone who wants to take a little check of their current fuel tanks to do this with their partner. We've got a quick quiz that you can do on our website. It's fuelcollective.com.au/fueled up quiz. And you can check your tanks, have a little look at how things are going. And with your partner, it's really not about how full the tank is. It's that you both are on the same page, So if both of you are giving that tank a 1, cool. You both know that that's a problem. Whereas if one of you is giving it a 1 and someone else is giving it a 5, then there's a big gap there. There's a differentiation in your expectations for that area of your life, and it creates an opportunity to talk about that gap. So we really recommend anyone and everyone can do that quiz. It's totally free, and it allows you to have a quick snapshot of where you're at and where you might want to be.
Definitely worth checking out, and such a valuable tool for people to really get an idea of where they sit in their life in each of these different areas, and also where their partner sits, and kind of assess where things are working and where they're not, and have an opportunity for further growth, which is so important.
And then the final piece, as we slightly touched on, is that we are going to launch product very shortly. So keep your eyes peeled and
watch this space.
Watch this space, yeah.
Well, Sammi, Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time to, I guess, take a step back and really open yourselves up and open this up to a lot of the audience. And thank you for giving me the chance to quiz you on your relationships and on Fuel Collective. I guess I do have one final question for each of you before this ends.
Bring it.
What would be your biggest advice to any couple that are right now that are kind of thinking we need some help or we're not too sure about this? What's your biggest, I guess, relationship advice?
Okay, I'm going first. So it's a quick story. So one of my girlfriends was one of the couples that Nath mentioned earlier who went through a really shitty divorce. And I was in her wedding, and when we were having this conversation about her relationship breaking down, I had no idea. I had no idea that things were as bad as they had been for her husband. And she was experiencing a lot of shame and a lot of embarrassment and a lot of discomfort, even talking about things that had happened and things that she'd been trying to navigate on her own. And I think that's really common, that we underestimate our network. We underestimate how much the people around us care. I think sometimes we can be a bit embarrassed that things aren't perfect. We live in this social media world where everyone, only shows the best bits. But I think if someone's having a rocky time in their relationship, start reaching out to your friends, to your family, to your network, and ask questions. Hey, have you ever had problems like this? How did you navigate it? Do you have any advice? Do you have any recommendations? And like we said, people will share what works for them. It may not be right for you, but at least you might have some other ways to approach that problem.
And Nathan, same question.
I think for me, it's probably what I mentioned earlier around the 2x2x2 date nights. I think it's been a real game changer for us, having a bit of a rhythm and a pulse around our date nights, and actually really taking that time, even if it is once a fortnight, to have some quality time together where it is just us and where we are really prioritizing our relationship. So I think that's a really good practice where both people can lean into the relationship. It's not one person taking the lead all the time, and just really take that time to reconnect with each other and remember why we actually wanted to be in a relationship in the first place.
And for anybody that's listening, I'm sure if you follow the Date Forever podcast on Instagram, you will have seen many snaps of Sammi and Nathan's date nights. Some of them, particularly through COVID and through lockdown, were incredible and quite unique. So you can see that the pulse that you guys have created, that 2x2x2, has really, you've made that your own, and you can see the impact that has. So absolutely awesome advice there for all the listeners. Well, Sammi and Nathan, again, thank you so much for allowing me to take over the Date Forever podcast. I am super honored, and it's been great to be able to share your story and the Fuel Collective story and how that all comes together and what that means for your audience and for so many people out there.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks so much for taking over.
This has been a cool chat. It's nice to be on the other side of things. As you know, one of our core values is to be the change, and that's about, taking accountability for what you can change in your own life, but also being the change that you want to see in the world. So to say thank you for taking over the mic, we have made a contribution to Roll Foundation to do a beach cleanup. So this is a project that operates in Indonesia, and we know how important our life below water really is. So thank you so much for making that possible.
That's absolutely amazing, guys. Thank you so much. I'm speechless.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.